Welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. That was pretty soft. I like that.
Yeah.
Was that a good intro?
It's,
Am I
it's,
getting
it's,
better?
It's better than your poor James Earl Jones impression you did a couple weeks ago.
The what?
Where you said this is, you tried to do James Earl Jones and you
Oh,
failed.
yeah, I can't do James Earl
you
Jones.
failed.
He's too good.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is Josh Solomon, who is my accomplice. And tonight we have Denis Goddard and Carla Gericke. Did I get it right that time?
You did!
Once in a row! I always butcher her name.
It's okay. That means people are starting to get the hang of it.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
good.
So anyway, today, which is weird, we had an anti-gun bill. What's Amanda Bolden's husband? I forget his name. Anyway, he had...
Mr. Bolden?
Mr.
Yeah,
Bolden.
Mr. Bolden. Representative Bolden had a bill in my committee to basically subvert the another method to subvert the Second Amendment. Many years ago, I believe I was a co-sponsor back in 2003, but I'm not positive. I have to go look. We had a bill to protect gun manufacturers from frivolous lawsuits, because what was going around the country is they couldn't, just as a different methodology to destroy the Second Amendment, people were just going and suing the heck out of gun manufacturers for a firearm used illegally by somebody. That would be like, if everybody remembers last summer we had that accident where some guy, I don't know if he's hired texting, but he drove his truck and his trailer off into the oncoming lane and wiped out an entire group of Marines on motorcycles.
Sue Chevy.
Yeah, exactly. So under the same thing that you could sue Chevy and the trailer manufacturer for killing all those people. It's an insane proposition. The trailer and the vehicle were working perfectly well. So therefore, just because it was used in a crime does not make the manufacturer liable. But they were suing anyway, even though they didn't have a real case, because manufacturers, a lot of them are on a pretty thin profit margin. So all you have to do is sue them about 5 or 10 times with these huge lawsuits. They have to defend themselves, and eventually they're out of business. And that was their intent. So we passed this law back in 2000. It went into effect in 2004 to protect them from frivolous lawsuits. And Representative Bolden is trying to repeal that. And that was in my committee. And the weird thing was there really wasn't that many people there opposing it.
Opposing it, really?
Correct.
The repeal?
Opposing the repeal.
So is this is specific to limited liability, right? On
For
gun,
firearms, yeah. So anyway, my part of the equation was Tony Hook from RTD over in Goffstown. He makes firearms and sells them, and he's got his own shop there in Goffstown. He came in and said, I was talking about opposing the bill, and then he said, just so you understand, I have a stack of applications for firearms back in my office, about that thick, of people that I would not sell guns to. If they can't come into my shop and I think they're sketchy, I won't sell to them, and I have a right not to. So he's all done. I raised my hand and I said, you said you don't sell it to sketchy people. He says, yes. I says, you sold one to me. That broke the place up pretty good. My chairwoman...
Do you think the low turnout for opposition, whether legislative opposition or non-legislative opposition, folks coming in to testify, do you think the low turnout might be due to burnout? I mean, we've asked these folks to come out against these anti-gun bills time and time again over
which
the
is
last
part of their
several weeks.
tactic, right?
Right.
Of course, is they end up, you just keep bringing the bills back and back and back, right? I mean, we're seeing that with all the bills
I'm
that were
pro-gun and I have a job, but I can't take
Right.
that many days off to
Yeah,
go and
I
fight
mean,
well,
for you.
I think that there's one of the variables that was pointed out to me. I'd like to say I thought of it, but I did not. Was that a lot of it is cockiness. They know or believe the governor's going to veto it, so So what? What's my testimony going to do? They also, I think it's
for people who aren't testifying in opposition.
Right.
Okay. I
So
see.
there's also part of them is kind of conceding the point because they kind of figure, well, it's going to go through the House anyway because the Democrats hate guns. So I think it's a combination, but still bad. There should always be vigorous opposition.
Right, because no matter what, the more testimony you get in there, the people who are elected by these people start to realize that maybe I am on the wrong side, if they're reasonable.
Well,
I don't know
and
how
actually,
many of those you have on that side, but
Gary, I'd be curious to know. So we are all here pretty much because we saw each other at the State House last week when we went to testify on a facial recognition bill, right?
Yeah.
So you introduced a bill to ban facial recognition software.
Yeah, she segued into what we're supposed to be talking
Yes.
about.
See?
By the state.
Yes, facial recognition software being used by the state,
Yes.
right? So in that case, we had several people who came to testify in support of the bill because the bill is a bill to ban facial recognition software for the state to use.
Right.
And there were hardly any people who actually testified and were like, "Hey, we're pro Big Brother," right?
Except for the guy selling the software.
Except for the guy selling the software.
The guy
yeah.
selling the software, and then I did notice, of course, that all the police associations did sign in opposition.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
'Cause I didn't see- I didn't hear
they
him testify.
testify, but they signed in.
Despite
and
the fact that there was an amendment that they had requested.
yes.
That was, I won't even go there. It's how far that.
it's kind of disappointing to see so many police organizations supporting this type of.
It's kind of disappointing
of
seeing
Big
the fact
Brother.
that the police
Now,
are
I
the
understand
largest
they have a
threat that
job
we
to
have
do.
to our own liberty.
And I understand they have a job to do, but one of their
wish
jobs
I could
is
take
to
that and
protect
not do
our
it.
liberties.
But they're
One of
not.
their jobs is to make sure that, if you're not involved with the justice system at all, then you don't need to be, and we don't need to be
They're
watching you.
actively opposing our liberties.
Right,
I would pay
exactly.
I would pay extra taxes
But
to
they
have to
should
stay
be
at home.
They should be specifically protecting that particular
They
liberty.
should be, but they're
as
acting
long as
well.
they're not
I mean,
already involved,
what-
they
what
should
I
not
would-
I'm
be
at gunpoint.
subject
I
to
have to
this
pay for these
surveillance.
So
That's part of it.
here's something. I don't know. I'm sure someone must have tried this over the years. I actually think that there should be a bill that says if you work for the state, you actually cannot testify in favor or in opposition of whatever the position is. You're there to implement whatever the legislation is.
How about you can't testify while you're wearing your
Wearing-
uniform, acting under the color of the state and saying, as a police officer, I have... Well, as a police officer, you should sit down and be quiet and stop affecting us and just stop taking our freedoms.
Well, because
The police officer is there to enforce the law, to make sure.
Well,
that
that's what they
everyone-
say, but
Right.
then they come
But
and they
then
testify
come
on
and they
bills.
become part of creating the law.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
you know what? There's something that I want to do that may or may not take away your liberties, but I can't because it's illegal for me to do so. So I'm going to go to the State House and say, please, please, please make it illegal for me, or make it legal for me to oppress the people in my town a little bit more.
Look, and we understand, so something like facial recognition software, it's just a tool, right? So in the same way that we make the argument that a gun is just a tool, right? So a gun inherently is not evil or good. A fork inherently doesn't make you fat or thin. It depends
Well, I would
on
disagree with
what
that.
you do with the tool, right?
Check
If
it
you
out.
stuff too many forks in your mouth, you're gonna get fat, right? If you use a gun, you can use it for evil intent, or you can use it for good defensive intent, right?
Yeah.
So we know with something like the facial recognition software, fine, it could probably be used for good and bad intent. But I think the conversation should actually start with
Yeah,
what
but there's a-
kind of future do we
There's-
want to
there's a-
build
there's
in
a-
New Hampshire?
Right. Well, there's a huge difference, too. Facial recognition software inherently gathers information on people that aren't doing anything wrong.
Exactly.
Whereas somebody does a burglary and they look at the tape and stuff like this and identify the person and go after them. Well, they did something wrong, so trying to identify them is reasonable. But just randomly identifying people to get a sense of who is here and who isn't there is an absolute violation of your liberty.
Right, because, and that goes to my point, right, about what kind of future do we want to create, right? Because, I could tell from some of the legislators, the way their questions were being framed, that, they clearly want to create some kind of dystopian future where we just make it super, super easy for law enforcement to catch bad guys. Now, okay, that could be some kind of future that we may want to see. That's certainly not the future I want to see. Because in order to create the world where you can catch the bad guy by a blink of an eye, you have two problems. One is, what is your definition of a bad guy? Because someone's writing those rules, and right now we're like, oh, it's this, this, and this. But in China, for example, where they use this facial recognition software and they've introduced a credit rating attached to your face and like all of that, jaywalking, they actually use facial recognition software to catch and ticket jaywalkers in China.
And then your social credit goes down, and then you're
and
not
then you
allowed
can't
to,
ride the subway.
You can't get on a train, you can't get on a plane, you're not allowed to apply for certain types of business loans.
Your kids aren't going to the right kind of school.
And it's all because of surveillance.
Yep. Dennis, I wanted you on because you had your testimony on the facial recognition bill was so
Impassioned.
chilling. Chilling is the word I would use.
Yeah. I'm freaked out, frankly. I'm freaked out. I think we're already kind of doomed. I think that we're into the stage where the war's already started. The people don't even know that it's going on.
Right.
If you had any sense at all, you'd be, well, I won't say it because we're being recorded, but, you know, I think defensive violence at some point is reasonable.
Okay, so tell the viewer some of the stuff you said in testimony about how the eventuality of facial recognition software, and I think it's probably already true in England, which you would think is a free state, but not really.
20 years ago, they were listed as the most surveilled population on the planet. God knows
London
where they are
actually
right now.
is the most surveilled place
Exactly.
in the world.
So-
Right.
There are 500,000.
Because you
CCTVs.
were talking about the government going from, well, let's just see who's on the street today, to not only being able to know when you're going to be on the street, where you're going when you get there, and who you're liable to sleep with that night.
Yeah. I think a big problem that I hear in the State House is people using the wrong tense. They act as if we might be about to develop an Orwellian dystopia. I'm sorry, that was about 5 or 6 years ago. And you need to just disabuse yourself of the idea that you're not already living in that world. You're just not quite aware of it yet, but it's becoming normal. Don't worry. You're already kind of used to the idea that you're being surveilled. Your children will never know that crazy idea of being alone. It's already gone. Don't worry.
You know, it's interesting because I have a friend who doesn't really care about the Fourth Amendment, right? So the Fourth Amendment is the right to privacy, and that's pretty much where we say, hey, you know what, if you want to know anything about us in a free society, you have to go get a warrant to come and to like look through my stuff or to, you know, want to pay attention to anything.
And New Hampshire
And
just passed.
Exactly, by 80+%, Article 2B, which basically says, you know, we have an inherent right that is natural to live free from government intrusion in our personal and private information. So it's going to end up in the courts to decide what that personal and private information is. But what we do know is more than 80% of Granite Staters, so our friends and neighbors, the man on the street, all of us voted for that and said we do not want more government intrusion in our lives. How did, you know, the powers that be respond? I mean, certainly here in Manchester, New Hampshire, they just put up their first 2 police surveillance cameras. How do I know? I was in a lawsuit with the ACLU to say we don't want these cameras. And they were like, well, we're going to put them up. Then what they said was, the judge actually in that case said, well, yes, there is this constitutional amendment, and yes, there is this other law called highway surveillance is prohibited. So in New Hampshire, it's supposed to be that you're not allowed to put up these cameras that we sometimes see at the red lights and stuff, and you're not allowed to surveil cars in New Hampshire to just be like license plate scanners or who's where,
Well,
who's
we have
what,
we
right?
have legal ALPRs now.
Yes, which is a problem too, and we need to roll those back. But those
These offenses against our liberties are direct attacks, as if the police were literally pointing guns at us, maybe ones that don't shoot bullets, but that take our rights just the same. In my opinion, if there's an attack on me, I'm absolutely justified in using defense. And I think it's well past the time for lawsuits. I think we're well into the time for direct action. I'm sorry, if you're surveilling me, it's time for a hackback. It's
Right.
time for spray paint. It's time for, I'll pay the fine, I'll go to jail. I don't care anymore. Stop attacking me. And you'll find that the attacks back stop.
Right.
Well, and so here in Manchester with these surveillance cameras, we kind of have a Kafka-esque catch-22 thing going on, right? So the judge actually said, look, you're right. These cameras are probably going to surveil cars driving down Manchester,
Elm Street, yeah.
right? So, yes, they're going to surveil them, but you can't prove it until you actually have someone who is surveilled and identified by this new dispatch person who's going to be looking at the cameras 24/7.
And that right there is the judge saying, wink, wink, when you do catch somebody, find another piece of evidence to cite so that you never have to cite the camera as your source of information.
And
And
thanks
so-
to
and
Snowden,
that's
we
exactly
know
what
that's,
they'll do.
and it's no longer crazy talk. Thanks to Snowden, we know this is modus operandi.
Yep.
This is the procedure.
We're going to
And
gather
so-
the information illegally, and then once we have the case, when we present it, we're going to leave that
That
piece
part.
of
So
what do
information
you do?
out.
So
What do you
that's
do
called,
about
well,
that?
you can't, I mean,
Oh.
basically you can't win anymore, right? But,
Well,
like
we'll see.
legally.
That's not necessarily true.
But so that part's called parallel construction, right? So I actually watched a video by I think he was a Stanford professor who was looking at that sort of issue of the metadata, right? So if we take a step back a little bit and just sort of tell the story of the surveillance state, right?
There's some people that watching who probably are completely clueless as to what metadata actually
Okay.
means. So
I'm going to
back up and explain a
I'm
little
going
bit of
to
what that means.
explain that to you. So metadata is basically what the well, it's what
A picture on metadata.
I'm trying to find the right notes here and see if I can read them, which I can't, but I will put on my sexy old lady glasses. So basically what
say
happened
that on
was when
TV?
we had Snowden, right, when Snowden's revelations came out, he was talking about, hey, the NSA, the National Security whatever the agency, right, one of the alphabet soups, they have started like just hovering up all our information, right? So they where anything that goes through your phone, your telephone line, whatever. And then they said, yeah, okay, people are upset. You think we're violating your privacy. Guess what? We're not violating your privacy, they claim, because it's just metadata. So
In other words, it's too much information for them to glean what Carla is doing
right,
today.
so they claim it's not personally identifiable and that it's not densely interconnected and that it's not sensitive information. These are the claims that the NSA makes, right? Because they're trying to say, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we're not really surveilling you, we can't tell it's you. But they're lying. So this Stanford professor actually went and he looked at these things and they looked at those three claims and they were like, okay, so if they're saying it's not identifiable, it's not something that you would know it's Dennis walking down Elm Street. With a sample of 1,000 people that literally just gave them their data, right? They crowdsourced it, they didn't break any laws, they just asked people to participate to see, right? 91% of those 1,000 people, they could easily identify within 3 steps who exactly it was. Right. Basically, if you have someone's phone number, if you can use Google, you can find out who that person is attached to that phone. For the not densely interconnected, the actual file they used was a photo of Kevin Bacon, because the joke is everyone's 7 degrees away from Kevin Bacon. And basically with just one hop, they could go from someone's Verizon account to anyone that they talk to on Skype. So that circle just immediately goes out from, now we know it's Carla and we know everyone that Carla knows. And then on the it's not sensitive thing, they're like, They tracked one person who on one day got a phone call from a doctor's office, then got a phone call from a cardiologist, then got a phone call, a long one, from a hospital. And just based on those metadata phone calls, they could tell what that person had had a cardiac arrest, had had an arrhythmia, and what their health situation was. So when they talk about the metadata, they're pretending like, oh, it's just this general non-identifiable information, but it's probably as identifiable as you can humanly be found to be.
That explanation right there is probably the best of what metadata is, right? We know that you got a call from a cardiologist. We know that you got a call from a rehab center. We know that you got a call from this. But we didn't listen to the call. We didn't listen to all the personal information that you were exchanging with these doctors. But based on the call type, right? The metadata is the type of call, not the call itself. That's what metadata is. And they're saying that metadata is not personally identifiable, but anyone who's in the data world, and which I am, I'm a professional data analyst.
I can tell by the beard.
Anyone who deals with data on a daily basis can tell you that this type of activity plus this type of activity plus this type of activity equals X.
Right.
Right? And that's what metadata is.
Now I want to terrify everyone in the studio. I watched a YouTube clip where a police officer from Oregon, Washington State, made the statement where he said, we don't have to worry about facial recognition software because it is not identifying the person. It is metadata being transferred to a database. Therefore, you have, according to their logic, no Fourth Amendment protection.
Right.
So they're saying it's not a
is
photo of Gary's face going up. It is
But
the points on his face,
of
which
all
are
the people walking on the street that are 5'10" with cheekbones of this high
what's
and
crazy
a nose
about
this long.
what's crazy
right?
about these systems, they
can
don't
take
do
all of
that.
information.
They don't do that.
Yeah, but that's
People need to know this. These systems don't say, here's a male, probably male with silver hair, glasses. That's not how they work.
Yeah.
These systems, they just get a whole bunch of raw bits. And we've been working on these things for a solid 25, 30 years, right? More, 35 years. And there are very crude attempts to make software systems that work like little clumps of brain cells, right? And are they really like biological brain cells is a really good question, but they're sure getting powerful enough to where they can do things. And here's the deal. We don't know how brains work, but we're getting to the point where we can put into a computer a simulation of a brain to where we don't know how it works, but it works like a brain enough to it can recognize grandma. And if you ask the people who make these things, they don't know how it recognizes grandma. And there's a huge area of research figuring out how can you understand and analyze mathematically the structure of the neural thing to figure out what it's actually looking at. Major research area. But at the end of the day, these are black boxes. We have no idea why this one says that and that are the same guy. No one can tell you.
Wow.
See, I thought all of it was sort of based on algorithms and data points between the things.
It's all algorithms
is.
and data points,
It
but
is.
it's higher dimensional
So
structures.
AI does have, a huge, massive data set sitting behind it that the AI engine, the program, can access and use that information to learn, right? And then it uses, like you said, it uses a series of algorithms to take what it's learned and apply it to what it sees. And it may not find that particular person in this database, but it can see it and say, you know what? I'm going to go do a Google search, a Facebook search, and I'll tell you exactly who that person is, right? And so it works kind of autonomously. In addition to having that data set to work with, it will also
Create its own data set.
exactly.
Okay.
And now we know, of course, so there are two components here as well, right? So there's the sort of law enforcement part of it, right? And whether if you have this software and you're running it against law enforcement databases, whatever those may be, starting with, your local PDs, mug shots or whatever. But then we know that there are actually companies out there, probably not very ethical companies, that are scraping social media. So they're scraping any photos from, Twitter, Facebook, all of that stuff, and they're putting those into databases that are now also being sort of accessed by law enforcement. So there's not just, sort of the state component of it. There's also this private component of it, which is why I really liked your bill, because it was like, look, we don't even know what's going on here. We do know that this data or the tech at this stage is very inaccurate. It's kind of racist, apparently. Like, it does not identify black faces very accurately.
I had Professor Buzz Shear on, and I speculated that the reason, because for those people who don't know, facial recognition software is very inaccurate when it comes to people of color. And so I said, I bet you it's because their skin's so dark, the difference between the pixels is not radical enough. Like when something looks at you or me, the shadow around my nose is very obvious, and the color differences are very obvious, where if all the colors are darker, it's less distinctive.
That's absolutely true. Color analytics is a large part of it. But I read a story.
But he said, "Where's your degree to back that up?"
Yeah,
Well, no, there's an MIT professor, a lady of color, who has done extensive research on this now, and
there was an article a year or so ago.
That's what I was correct.
Where no, you are correct. There was an article a year or so ago where a company got. Maybe it was even Facebook. I shouldn't have said that. But I do recall that facial recognition identified two pictures as the same person, and one of them was actually a monkey, right? And so they were sued for racism, right? Rightly so. But the facial recognition software failed at that level. So there's a color depth problem there, especially with shadows. But I also have seen another study. Where the AI engines that are doing the facial recognition and whatnot are written by humans who are susceptible to error, right? And so there's this discussion amongst the AI community about whether or not the AI itself is biased because of the programmers who put it together. And that's not just with facial recognition, that's with any other type of automatic artificial intelligence, right?
But I feel like
is that bias there because of the programmers, and that's one of the key arguments.
And it will be, but that will also change over time. It's kind of like, the first high literature was written by old white dudes, and we've evolved since then, and it's like that'll happen, right? Like with
it goes beyond just facial recognition. I mean, it's like this idea that drones
the Greeks and the Romans
can pick out their kill targets on the Chinese, right?
Young white dudes.
The Chinese were writing before that too.
I swear, they were like way ahead of most all my ancestry.
But it extends to AI that goes into military drones, right? So they've got drones out there that are on their own, autonomously flying around, waiting for targets, right? Now you've got human handlers back home, but there are periods of time where they are completely autonomous and have to make a kill decision, right? And that's one of the things is what's it making its decision on? Is it based on the uniform? Is it based on the headwear?
Well, I mean, in the Middle East, if you're a military-aged young male, regardless of whether you are if you're a young kid, of fighting age in the Middle East, you're allowed to kill them.
Any AI, any facial recognition, anything like that is going to inherently have two major flaws. It's going to have the bias of the programmers, and then it's going to have the inherent incapability of functioning like the human brain, right?
I think those are both
going to be mistakes.
As technologists, right, we're going to arbitrarily get as good as we want over time. I think the real question here, the only question here, is how much power are we willing to give to the monopoly on the use of force?
Right.
The ring is too powerful for anyone to hold.
Which is deeply ironic because they had to call the doorbell the ring.
Yes. Here's a short, this is a little safety thing for everyone out there. If there's a thing that connects to your home internet to make your life easier, do not install that. Are you idiotic?
I know, people
Like,
are
do you
horrified.
want
I have
people to
an
just
Alexa
take all
at
of your
home.
data and just ship it to anyone who'll pay for it? Just give
But
me
here's
a
the difference
I
too,
want to point out something else that's racist. So, a lot of people are conceding another part of their privacy that they have no idea about. You'll see the commercials on for Learn Your Ancestry. They send their DNA to a company. Okay.
I'm guilty on this.
So that they can find their ancestry. They have so much. They don't even need that much because computers have made mathematics almost unrecognizable to when we were in school, or me anyway. They can, if they had your DNA, they already have enough of a database with 1 million people to identify almost every white person in the United States of America.
So
Just the database from 23andMe can identify almost every person in America except black people, because I think they're a little bit more suspicious of authority, or they don't have the money for frivolous things like checking their DNA.
They just don't have the data in the
They
database.
don't have the database, so I self-identify as black now.
well, I
that
am
way they can't-
officially African American.
Oh, you are African American,
I've got a
so
condition, and they let me do a genetic thing for like free because of research. And if you want to further the science of it, like, I'll do anything to, like, if someone else doesn't have to suffer, that's great. But now you've got this weird dilemma because of the government. Now I've got this weird dilemma where I want to help the science, but I don't want to give my oppressors the tool to destroy me.
But I think that's an important distinction, and I think that's something that people back home and when people, wrestle with this issue need to think about, right? So I always put privacy into two different buckets. There's the corporate sort of private world, right? So I'm like, okay, so if Google is tracking me online, worst case scenario, they're gonna try and sell me a pair of shoes I don't want.
Oh no, that's not where it's going.
No, but
you are
but
wrong.
the difference is
It's
this
not-
is a private relationship that I have some form of. I can take it or leave it.
That is no.
As
Can walk away.
Dennis said,
No, you
there's a
can't.
monopoly on violence. So when I look at the relationship between me and the state, it becomes a different thing. I can pick to have a doorbell that monitors everyone who rings my bell and whatever. I prefer not to go to those people's houses, but okay, fine. That is a private situation.
No,
when we talk about the state, the danger becomes we don't know what laws there are anymore. The state is so too big that there are Harvard law professors who claim that we each commit 3 felonies a day because there are so many laws that you have no idea.
Okay,
and it's probably like stepping on a frog when you're like walking across your grass and it was a half wetland puddle. Who knows what it is,
wait,
right?
let me just chime in for a second. I think you're wrong.
Okay.
Because
I'm not, but we'll
okay.
go.
I think, let me finish. So I think what's going to happen is somebody like Trump is going to keep pushing for nationalism, okay? I think the people at Google, Amazon, Facebook, and the corporations are going to unite and create almost a global government and have the same what is it called? China, they call what do they call it?
Social credit score?
Social credit score in the United States. They'll supersede government and use that to oppress you. So yes, you can buy a gun tomorrow,
If your freedom score is good enough.
If your freedom score is good enough, you can get a credit card to buy it. But when you do, your credit score just went down.
But
So yes, you can buy that firearm, but your next car is going to cost you an extra $10,000.
But if we I believe, right, that everything in life is really based on incentives, right? So you want to, so what is the incentive for the companies
Control.
to suppress us?
Control.
No, their job is to sell you
It
stuff,
was when
right?
they were striving to become wealthy, but now they have everything. Now they want control.
You see, I don't buy it. I don't
Okay.
buy it. I just don't, because they don't have a monopoly on violence. So
Dennis-
I can
Dennis.
walk away from Google, but I can't walk away when they have drones. MPD now has drones in Manchester.
We're
We
the
have
moment.
surveillance cameras on our streets. And I want you to
Until
understand.
someone wakes up and is a patriot.
These are the people who said to us, right, when that surveillance camera bill was heard in 2009, the highway surveillance bill.
Yeah.
The then assistant DOT guy from New Hampshire, Earl Sweeney, testified at the State House. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's kind of a quote, right, where he said, unlike places like London, if in New Hampshire we ever wanted to put up surveillance cameras in downtown, we would have to come back to the legislature and get your permission. That is in my lawsuit. So now we know 10 years later, they're like, oh no, we didn't mean that.
No,
so
right.
when I hear them saying we have drones and we have cameras, and oh, by the way, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we promise we're not going to use facial recognition software, which is a quote from Chief Capano. So we should just take their word for it, like when they lied to us in 2009, right?
Right.
So it's like, not only are they implementing this technology, they're like bullface lying to us, and then when we call them out, the courts aren't protecting us. We genuinely, it's kind of like, you know, where are we? I mean, I'm an activist, right? I do a lot of my activism at City Hall. So if I now want to bring out 100 people to come protest the militarization of police, who do you think is going to be comfortable going there? So this has a chilling effect on the First Amendment.
Well, there was actually a bill that I'm going to vote against. It's by a Republican because they're trying to fight against the people in Antifa, short-sighted. It's a bill to make it illegal to protest wearing a mask.
Yes, I went to testify against that
That
too,
is so
because-
silly because eventually you're going to need one if you want to still have your freedom of speech.
I was
Because
so
otherwise,
pleased- I was
Huh?
so pleased to see that come unanimously ITL out of committee.
Oh, it was?
It's
I
going
would-
on
I-
the consent calendar.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay.
It's dying in a voice vote, and I hope that he who filed it thinks about, you know, the symmetry of all things.
yeah, I don't think he did. He's a really nice guy, but
Is there a similar law like that anywhere in the United States?
Oh, yeah. This was modeled on, was it New York?
Yeah, there are some states, but then again, you know, when you're doing anything that New York, California, Rhode Island, or
Not to say that I'm a
Oregon
fan
don't do
of
it.
Antifa and their tactics, but I mean that makes perfect sense. You know, there will be a time, or there could be a time. I won't say there will be a time, but there could be a time where
gonna be a time.
we don't want to be identified, but
Wrong
we do want
tense
to be
every
out
time,
there.
guys.
I know, I agree, I
And of
agree.
course-
Because
of course-
what's going to happen?
Of course, we say that. We say we want to wear masks. The first thing we're going to get called is
But-
KKK.
well,
and, you know.
No, but I mean, the irony of it was that day that we went to testify on the mask ban. First of all, there was a woman who came to testify from, like, she was born and raised in communist China and left as a student. She came to the States when she was like 22 years old. And she gave like heart-wrenching, compelling testimony that the entire committee kind of like sat back and they were like, that an immigrant has to come remind us of our American values is actually, you know, shame on us, right? And I was like, wow, thank you, you know, for coming and telling people
Where's she
that.
live?
I think she's where maybe.
Where? Yeah.
Yeah.
She lives in where?
Yeah, she just where.
I gotta
where?
find out. I gotta get her on. That
But
sounds
that
awesome.
same day, I came home, and because I do a lot of police accountability work, right? My feed has a lot of police accountability stuff in it. And I was looking, and there was a photo from a protest where it was showing all the police had hats on, balaclavas up to here, only their
Absolutely.
eyes were sticking out. And I was like, but see, now if that would be an exception, which I think was how that bill was written, was kind of like, well, you're not allowed to wear masks, citizens.
we are.
But we are.
And we don't want you. Well, the reason we want to hide our faces is because when we go home to our families at night, we don't want you to know that that was us.
Right. Now, you know,
Beating
if we
us to
just
death.
objectively
Wouldn't it be
look
nice if
at
people
that.
respected police enough to where they didn't have to fear? Wouldn't it be
Right.
nice if police actively tried to earn that respect by not enforcing laws that they know are complete BS,
Right.
and then could earn some little shred of respect back?
Well, that's it. There are good police officers out there.
I've heard. I've not seen the evidence, but I've heard. I'd love to be proven
There are at
wrong.
least 264 in New
Lately,
Hampshire
I've
who
heard that-
aren't
I've heard
good
that rock
because
stars
they're
have
on the
had
Lori's
election.
list that
Right.
is secret and being
Right.
kept
That
secret
Laura
away
list
from
is another
us.
topic for me. But
But these things are all interchanged.
20
know,
years
yes,
or
I
so,
know.
I see
It's
more and more
authoritarianism.
police officers who they got this Dudley do-right attitude, right? Good intentions,
Of course.
but they're going way beyond what they should be allowed to do. This concepts like probable cause, right? They're pushing the limits of this probable cause to search your car, to enter your home, and they'll use any justification they can to get there. Now, again, maybe good intentions, but it does violate our Fourth Amendment.
If there's one lesson
more and
that-
more
yeah.
every day.
If there's one lesson I thought was so important to teach my children, it was this, that it's always going to feel like when you're doing what's really important and what's right, it's always going to feel like it's okay to do whatever it takes to be
Right.
right. And what you're going to find out also is that our side is always the one that's right, and the other guys are always wrong. And when you understand that works both ways, then you're in a position to do just about anything on this earth.
Right, I
Until
know.
then, you're not.
Right.
Yeah, as long as you go by the edict that the ends justify the means, there's no telling what horrors you can perform
Indeed.
in for the purpose of good.
And the understanding that your opponent, in whatever the conflict is acting in the belief
And-
that they're acting for
Right.
good,
They
and that
feel
you are
like
doing
they're
the
the
evil.
ones that are in the right, and there's no mediator in that case, especially when you've got that conflict at 10 o'clock at night between a police officer and someone he pulled over in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
right? There's this conflict that there's no one there to mediate.
And they're used to dealing
But
with
it's
it worse
also,
than us.
but it's also like, should we be pulling people over because they dropped from 40 to 30 miles as you're going into the town, right? Like, is this the best use of our time?
We play this game of guess what the right speed is.
So there's this whole, there's this whole culture of over-policing that we've created in this country. And, I'm an immigrant. I moved from South Africa 23 years ago now. And I fight for liberty here because I grew up in a police state. I know what it looks like. I see it here. And people are just blindly thinking that it can't happen here. It is happening before our eyes. I'm a liberty activist. I got called a domestic terrorist in 2013 by the police chief of Concord, who said they needed a Bearcat, a armored vehicle that has a turret that can shoot tear gas that is now being used consistently. If you read the paper, go read. Every time there is now a standoff, their term for when they come to your house and you don't want to leave your house and get in the paddy wagon, they are tear gassing people. There was the incident last year at the Quality Inn in Manchester where 2 people died because 17 tear gas canisters were deployed into their hotel room. We still haven't gotten the results of what actually happened there. But I talked to the girl who died, who was 21 years old's mother, and she said that the coroner said to her, well, we're saying it was environmental factors, but I think it was probably like the tear gas canisters. And oh, by the way, we had the body cremated, so you can't do your own autopsy.
Of course.
So I'm just like, look, we don't want to say it's happening here, but it is happening, and these pieces of the puzzle are all coming together. We have this militarization of the police, and now they want to introduce things that are going to make us slaves to the state. If you want to make the world safe, we can make the world safe, but it's not going to be free. One of your rights as a free person is the right to move freely and to do what you want to do.
So
At least you're not passionate about it.
I mean, I'm frustrated because I feel like, New Hampshire is this unique place. I mean, we passed that constitutional amendment.
Well, the thing
no one wants this here. Why are we getting it?
The problem I see is short-sightedness. Okay, so I was testifying. Was I testifying or I was on the committee? I don't remember which. But I made the point. We were talking about a DNA testing. And I made the point. I said, look, yes, right now it takes, when the first DNA was sequenced, it took, I think, a few years to sequence it. Now they can tell if you're related to somebody within a couple hours. I said, very soon, the police will just pull out their phone and scan something and know whose DNA that was. And then they'll be able to collect DNA on all kinds of people just out of curiosity, just like the facial recognition software. And if you can't see that coming, you're super blind. But nobody, so
in London, London, I saw footage where it was 5 plainclothes policemen who went down, it wasn't an attack, but sort of surrounded a 14-year-old schoolboy in school uniform. The facial recognition software identified him as a suspicious person of some sort. He was a black kid. They had a motorcycle that swooped in. They did fingerprint and DNA tests right there on the sidewalk. This was some other kids, phone footage.
The police they can just put your finger right there.
And it turned out, it was the wrong identification. The poor kid, so they all leave, and the poor kid's just shaking, and his friend comes over, and it's so now you've traumatized this kid probably permanently, which we also know with these drills in the schools that are happening, which is also part and parcel of this militarization. And control and authoritarianism and totalitarianism, that lo and behold, they just did a study and they're we think actually these active shooter drills might actually be harming our children. I'm you don't say.
That bill is wonderful. There's a bill to that effect, presently in judiciary, I think.
Is it?
And that would allow parents to pull their children to opt out of active shooter drills because they're traumatic. Are you kidding me?
When's that coming up? I didn't know that.
It's already had the public hearing.
Then it's not in judiciary. I didn't hear it.
Oh, okay. Then it must have been in criminal justice. Then.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, of course. The horrible fact is that we have public schools.
Okay,
we'll talk about that later.
So on the counter argument to that, I grew up at a time where we practiced kissing our butt goodbye because of a nuclear strike.
Sure.
So I don't know that it's neither one. I don't think is good. I mean, practicing for a nuclear attack.
Have armed police running through the hallway.
But you understand
but you were imagining yourself being vaporized.
But they weren't teaching you that because they were trying to protect you from an actual nuclear attack. That is fear mongering, which is a technique used. It's a device used by totalitarian, authoritarian regimes to control their people. Look, you're 8 times. Some say 55, but I'm going to go with the conservative number. 8 times more likely to be shot and killed by a police officer than to be harmed by a terrorist. So if no one is scared of getting shot by a cop, stop being scared of terrorism. Stop being scared. We're being scared so that we can give up our rights, so that lady who was in Hong Kong when they were protesting these exact totalitarian things with their umbrellas and their face masks, because they know they have one shot not to give up these rights. And frankly, we have one shot not to give up these rights, which is why I'm fighting for these things. And there was an American lady who had the temerity to say to the street protesters, but security is more important than liberty. And that's the wrong answer, and every Granite Stater needs to understand all things flow from liberty.
So I posted on Facebook, because I don't want anybody to ever see it, when I announced the show tonight, that liberty, privacy equals liberty.
I believe that. Absolutely. Because privacy is also, why is it important? It's your sense of self, right? So you know, like, I keep a diary, right? I forgot it here once. Thank God they saved it for me. But, you know, you get to explore, you get to decide who you are. None of us are like these fully formed people, you know? Maybe someone is. I don't know. I've looked at my cousins and I'm like, I think all 13-year-old boys are gross and racist, at least for a semester. And then they grow out of it, you know? And these things change. We change and we evolve. But you should have the right to be able to explore who you are and what you are.
Well, I think the big deal, too, is what we're doing to our children. You've got 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds. And I told this to my grandson who plays online games. I says, dude, be careful of what you say. And I shouldn't, in the perfect world, it shouldn't matter. But I said, be careful of what you say. He said, well, it's just on a game. So you don't think they have access to that? What's going to happen when you go for a security clearance because you want to join the FBI when you're 21 after college, and they go back and say, well, why'd you say this? Because they'll have that information. It is scary how much information they have.
Now, to be fair to, I don't know, but if anyone else feels this way, but I because of parallel construction, right, and because I have very little trust in the system, and partly, I mean, I'm a trained lawyer, and I think my sense of outrage comes out of the fact that I feel like the justice system doesn't serve us anymore. It's unjust, and I find that frustrating because nothing's working the way it should work, right? But I lost my train of thought.
They all become entities that protect themselves, not a servant of the people. Dennis, I'm going to let you have the last word because you've been.
I think direct action is critical. Laws are only going to get us so far. The good news is with technology, we don't have to give a flip what the laws are. We already have the technology with things like Tor browser, if you've heard of that. We have, frankly, the darknet. We have things like cryptocurrencies that are totally private. It is possible now to say whatever you want to say, broadcast whatever you broadcast, and even a trade with whoever you want to trade with, and the government can't do anything about it. So I don't care what your laws are.
Right. He's got an attitude, doesn't he?
Yeah, you're right.
Nobody on our show has an attitude.
No, that's true. We're all with a kinder, gentler rock, paper, hand grenades.
Not really. No.
The government can go put math in jail. It's not going to work.
And I remember what I wanted to say is just that we don't have to live in fear. Like, people should just, embrace life and stop buying all the fear mongering. Stop, genuinely, the world's a wonderful place. We don't have to be so scared of everything, and we don't have to monitor everything.
I'm scared of women, though. But now I got to go home to my wife.
I think some of them are scared of you.
No.
Only when he's driving.
Only when I'm driving. Hey, anyway, thank you very much, Dennis, Carla, and Josh. We'll see you guys next week.